So wetlands are largely thought to be the most important ecological component of the Montana landscape, which is pretty cool, and I get to talk about it today, which is exciting. So I'm Jessie Wiese. I'm the Southwest Manager of the Montana Land Reliance, and I've lived in Big Sky for the last 7 years or so, mostly in the nonprofit world, but I've also dabbled in wetland science a little bit, which is how I'm standing here today. So I'm going to go through today kind of what is a wetland, the characterization, wetlands that are common to Big Sky, things we might expect to see here, what the functions are, why wetlands matter from a landscape connectivity standpoint. So because I work for a land trust, I'm also going to talk today a little bit more about the importance of looking at things from a larger scale than just individual wetlands. And I think my slideshow might be moving faster than it's meant to be right now, so I'm going to try to stop it here. Is that a pause? Does that say pause? Okay. I think the last thing on that slide said opportunities, and the reason that I have that on there is because everybody else is pretty heavy on the data side, and I'm going to be kind of heavy on the opportunity side because I wasn't able to find a lot of data or information about wetlands in Big Sky. So if it's out there, and it probably is, and there are probably experts in the room that could help us find this, I would love to see that too. So before I go any further, I wanted to ask you guys, does anybody have an idea of the percentage of loss of wetlands that has taken place in the United States since around the 1850s or so?
90%.
Who said 90%?
Pessimist.
Yeah, that's a little high. Thankfully.
I was going to go maybe.
Thank God. It's actually lower than that too. So it's 50%. Let me see if I can get this rolling again. Resume. Oh, or end the show. Oh, geez. All right. Function F5. Sorry, I'll go through this quickly. Okay, so a lot of that loss took place pre-1954, before we really understood the importance that wetlands have on our full ecosystem. So a lot of that loss was due to conversion rates to agriculture at that time. We're still losing, though, even with all the regulations in place, and a lot of us probably know those regulations well, and they can be a little bit frustrating or feel like a bit of a process at times, but we're still losing up to 60,000 acres each year in the United States. Does anybody have an idea of what percentage Montana's lost in wetlands? So we've lost 30% of our wetlands, so we're doing better than the national average. And I know I have a fish biologist coming to speak next, so all I'm going to say here is that fish are heavily dependent on wetlands, and our economy is heavily dependent on fishing. So also 31% of plant species in the United States can be found in wetlands, and to put that in perspective, only 5% of the United States is actually in a wetland system. So incredible biodiversity there. Also, an acre of wetland can store 1 to 1.5 million gallons of floodwater. So this has been touched on a bit, but this is a really important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about water quality, connectivity, water storage, sedimentation, all of those things. So I have a couple different definitions up here for what is a wetland, and you could go out at different times a year and people would say this is a wetland or this isn't a wetland based on how it looks. So it's really important that we go deeper than the surface when we're talking about how to characterize a wetland. So the scientific definition is a little bit more lenient. It just says one or more of these following attributes. So essentially water-loving plants, soil saturation, and signs of hydrology. The legal definition is a little bit beefier and tries to incorporate all three of those things to say that that's a wetland. And if you want to learn more about that, there's a handy Army Corps of Engineers supplement that you can read. I won't get into that today. That's a little more than we probably all need to know. So again, the wetland hydrology, hydric soils, which are soils that form under conditions of saturation. And I like this picture because it's really an obvious one, which would be so nice if that's how it was always when we went out there. But you can also look for signs of mineral oxidation or reduction too, so you'd be looking for different colors in the soil. And then also hydrophytic vegetation. So if your soil is saturated enough that it's influencing your vegetation. So common Montana wetland types, you'll see the fen up there on the upper left. So that area is, gosh, I don't know what my PowerPoint is trying to move too quickly for me. The fen is highly influenced by groundwater. The wet meadow, and that fen I think is actually from the Madison Valley. The wet meadow picture, that's usually more close to the surface, water influenced. That picture also has a couple beaver dams on it, which are also really important for wetlands. Groundwater springs we see a lot, or seeps, and then also the intermontane potholes. So we maybe don't think about this as a pothole region, but they're considered that. So a little bit doomsday, but okay, this is craziness. I might just have to go back here. Okay. I don't know what's happening there, but at any rate, we know that there are several kind of detrimental things that can happen if we let our wetlands become impacted. So wetlands are a safe haven for biodiversity and lots of different animal species and waterfowl. So we'll see a decline in those populations if we see a bunch of fragmentation. We can also see increase in flood damage, increased sediment and nutrients in lakes and streams, which is part of the reason that the Gallatin River Task Force is now looking at doing these restoration projects around the golf course in the areas where the riparian areas have been damaged. You know, fish productivity can be lowered because that's taking up some of their important habitat. I'm not going to go deep into the permitting process either. Jeff touched on it. These are two common permits that you'd be looking at if you're going to impact a wetland. The reason these are in place is because we understand the importance of the impacting wetlands and overarching issues that can be caused by that. So my PowerPoint's going to fly through this for some odd reason. So we'll go back to this. So I want to talk a little bit broader scale about wetlands and land conservation. So 70% of the United States is in private land. That's an incredible opportunity for us to do some really cool conservation work. It doesn't have to be in a conservation easement form. There's so many programs out there, but I think looking at connectivity from a more landscape scale is really important. So connectivity includes both structural and functional components. Structural is just how close to habitat patches are, and then functional is how effective are those patches at actually helping animals, water, that kind of thing, move through that area. All right, I'm going to click it and then pause it immediately. So this map is a map, obviously, of the resort tax boundary, and it has all the wetlands on it that have been mapped, and it goes through the different types of wetlands on there as well. On this map, I mostly want to highlight that all the wetlands in Big Sky haven't been mapped. A lot of the reason for mapping in Big Sky so far has been if there's impending development coming. So it's important to look at this and say this is in no way a picture of all the wetlands in Big Sky and that there's a lot of work to do. I also have the conservation easements on there as well. If we're thinking from a landscape perspective, I wanted to show this map. So to orient ourselves, on the kind of right corner there, the big patch of private land is Big Sky. The green is Forest Service. This is one of the plates that we created, the Land Reliance, but this is the Madison Valley. And this just shows the importance of habitat connectivity and the importance of conservation easements through that process. So you could have an animal that's up in the tobacco roots, and it could actually travel down the Madison River corridor and make it all the way to Yellowstone National Park because of this. A lot of our conservation easements in the Madison Valley are also in riparian areas and on river corridors, so we've heavily prioritized that as well. I have another really cool map here I'm not sure if I'll have time for. How am I doing on time? Okay, so I'll just skip that map, but essentially...
Give that link to me and we'll get it on the website.
Okay.
So folks can look
Okay, so there's another tool that we've created at the Land Reliance that allows us to overlay information like wildlife movement across the landscape, wetlands, all the riparian features, the projected development, and take a look at which areas are high priority for the Big Sky area for watershed protection as well as wildlife protection. I'll briefly touch on Montana Land Reliance and what we've done. We hold nearly 1 million acres in Montana, 10,000 of which is wetland restoration, 1,600 miles of stream frontage. So I wanted to show this slide too because this is all of the conservation easements, and again I'll just say that conservation easements aren't the only tool for landscape scale conservation, but it certainly helps when you have almost 2.5 million acres that are being protected right now across the state. There's a handful of resources. I wanted to put the websites up there for you. So the Wetland Legacy Partnership, pretty impressive, 40 agencies. Tons of farm bill programs that pay landowners to help preserve the wetlands on their property. There's a new program that's the Channel Mitigation Easement Program that Montana Aquatic Resource Services is putting together, so check that out. Montana Wetland Heritage Mapping is also a really great resource. So they only have about 25% of Montana mapped though, so there's a lot of opportunity there as well. So with that, I'll go on to the next one. Yeah, I will.
Thank you so much, Jessie.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Joe's trying to get his work done.